Hi friends, I'm Red Stegall. I'm an entertainer, author, and proud Texas rancher. I'm inviting my fellow cattle ranchers to join me in the Alamo statewide stampede, a simple way to help preserve our Texas heritage. When you sell your livestock, just let the auction house know you'd like some or all of the proceeds to go to the Remember the Alamo Foundation. If you don't have livestock, no problem. You can still take part by making a donation. These tax-deductible donations will go directly to the Alamo Plan, which is preserving the Alamo for generations to come. And together we'll ensure we always remember the Alamo.
Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. There are places around the world that become part of the cultural zeitgeist. You hear the name and instantly understand its importance. The Alamo is one of those places. Today we reveal why. Why the Alamo, over and over and over through the centuries, found itself in the crossroads of history. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. We're joined by Ernesto Rodriguez, the Alamo Senior Curator, Historian, and Lecturer. Thanks for being here, Ernesto.
My pleasure, Emily.
Let's start with why this location. The Alamo didn't start here, and it was quite a journey to get to this location.
Yes, it starts down south on the banks of the Rio Grande, basically, a few miles from it, as Mission San Francisco Solano in 1700. And by 1716, there's an incursion of a Frenchman coming through the region, and it prompts Spain to act immediately. And the first thing they do is they decide, let's move. And so the priest, Father Antonio Olivares, asked if he can begin looking for a location. And they said, yes, wait for the military commander. When that takes too long, he decides to start without him. And it forces the military commander to march. And they arrive in San Antonio on May 1st, 1718.
But not to the location we know today as the Alamo.
Nope, not in this one. The first one would have been approximately 2 miles towards the north near San Pedro Springs Park. That doesn't work out because, well, when it rains, the springs flow. And water is not great for structures, so they move. And they end up on the other side of present-day River Center Mall. And a hurricane hits. And so they move to higher ground, and they end up on the present site that we are today.
It's hard to tell with all the big buildings around downtown San Antonio, but this is the highest part of downtown.
Yes, it is. We are at the highest point in downtown, so visibility in all directions is really great.
Most missions only stay in operation for about 10 years, but this one stuck around for about 70, becoming secularized in 1793. Why did this one remain a mission for so long?
It's one of the first missions in the area, and it's also due to the amount of people that are coming through it. And so many people are coming through the mission and going through the process of becoming Spanish subjects. Now, the other reason is, well, a mission establishes itself 10 years, and then it relocates to another location so that they continue to create more Spanish subjects.
In this case, the 4 missions are sister missions on the city's south side.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is there's so many people here, and not everyone gets along, right? Even if you are from the same familial bands, they don't typically get along. So they established the 4 other missions, but there's also the removal of a threat. The French are no longer a threat in Louisiana. It's now owned by Spain, so they don't need to continue moving east, and they're able to stay here and really, truly establish what is now San Antonio as a town.
Even after the mission stopped being a mission, it remained important. Why was that?
It's important because of the fact that it is basically the main center for people's coming and going. Now, while it's not an active church anymore, people are still living in the area. And you've got communities that have built themselves around the mission, right? The people that move from Los Adayes end up on the north side of us. People are still congregating in the region.
Why did the Alamo become the first hospital in Texas?
With the arrival of Napoleon, or his rise in France, it prompts movement of people, and he takes control of Spanish lands, which is Louisiana, and he sells it to the United States. Now the threat is once again back. And so the first thing Spain does is that they send troops from northern Mexico into Texas to help protect the borders. They arrive in San Antonio, and they end up occupying the old mission, San Antonio Valero, and it'll become known as the Alamo because they are the Alamo Company. Now, 2 years later, in 1805, the governor of Texas says, you must establish a hospital to not only treat the soldiers, but to treat the community. And that is a very important thing because it's the first hospital in Texas. And as a result, the following year, they do vaccinations for smallpox. So they are trend setting on the frontier.
The term groundbreaking can be overused in modern society, but this really was cutting edge.
It really was. And one of the things is that you think about modern medicine and then you think back to what they're doing here. And it was really modern for its time period because they are doing something that other places aren't doing. They're vaccinating the public, but they're also using techniques that they had learned from the occupation of the Moors in Spain. And it's really funny because you think about that and you think about today, and what are we all doing today? We share ideas. And guess what was happening in Spain during those 900 years? They were sharing ideas. One of the interesting things is that in Spain, in Seville, one of their important documents that they're housing is one where Spain is asked to help vaccinate people in Europe. That is incredible because they trusted the Spanish so much that you would send them to do the same thing they're doing in the Americas in Europe.
Here's another why the Alamo. Why was the Alamo important during the Texas Revolution?
The Alamo is important because it sits on the San Antonio River line and it protects the town of San Antonio. And the town of San Antonio sits on the major roads that come into Texas, along with La Bahia sits on the other roads that go into Texas. So these two places are very important. You control the roads, you control what's coming and going, and the Alamo sits on the high point overlooking that.
You could say the same thing about San Antonio, though, being on the crossroads. So why the Alamo specifically? Was something stored here that made it so important from a military perspective?
So one of the things that happened in Mexico with the rise of Santa Anna is that they passed the Militia Reduction Act of March 31st, 1835. And that does two things. First one, it limits militia sizes to 1 man for every 500 inhabitants. And the second one is all artillery should be sent to a central location. The Alamo is a central location in Texas. That's why there's so many cannons here during the Battle of the Alamo, because they've been shipped here by the people in Texas.
So it became a center, a flashpoint of battle for that reason.
Yes, it did.
Fast forward about 10 years when Texas becomes part of the United States. Why did the U.S. Army want the Alamo?
When the U.S. Army comes into the region, they come into San Antonio because it's one of the larger cities in Texas. And it's a strategic point once again, right? It sits on the roads. We joined the Union on December 29th, 1845. Our flag actually starts flying on February 19th, 1846, but U.S. forces are already here. And the minute we are annexed, basically, or a short time after, Mexico declares war on the United States. And we are at a strategic location on the frontier, and we sit in an area where if you're going to send goods south or west, we are right in the center of it.
And that's San Antonio's roots as Military City, USA.
Yes, it is.
So why did the U.S. Army add a roof to the Alamo?
So what happens is during the mission period, they never completed the church. They had the 3 rooms in it that were fully completed, which was the sacristy, the confessional, and the baptistry, but the nave was never finished. Now, to fully occupy this, what's left of the Alamo complex, the U.S. Army first, they want to tear down the church and rebuild something, and they are ordered not to. And then they're told, you have to fix what you have. And they put a roof on it so that they can use it as part of the warehouse and office space for the quartermaster depot.
Here's a why the Alamo that a lot of people don't know. Why were the first shots of the Civil War almost fired at the Alamo?
A group of secessionists come south to the Alamo and to San Antonio, and they demand the surrender of the quartermaster depot. Now, you can imagine the quartermaster here controls not only the goods at San Antonio, but everything west. And so it's a strategic point, and they have things that the Confederacy is going to need, supplies. And so they show up, and they demand that they surrender. And what ends up happening will change the course of American history, because David Twiggs, the commander, surrenders the quartermaster. No shots are really fired, and that is one of the most important things that happens, because had shots been fired here, imagine it's February 15th, 1861, 2 months prior to the firing of Fort Sumter. Imagine if shots had been fired here, hostilities would have started in Texas and spread east, and who knows where we'd be today.
A fascinating story that deserves its own episode in the future, because I know there's so much more to mine here. Our next Why the Alamo comes with a personal note. This episode was inspired by my sister, who asked this next question. As San Antonio grows, the Alamo becomes the heart of downtown. So why the Alamo? Why did this become the center of town as opposed to Mission San Jose, for example?
So when you think about the founding of the Mission San Antonio Valero, there are three parts to it: the mission, a town, and a fort. And they're established really close to each other. This mission is feeding the first town. And as it continues to feed, the other four missions will also feed into the main town. So that's one of the big reasons. Now, it also becomes important later on. When it becomes a quartermaster depot, you have soldiers present, and soldiers have money to spend. And so people start congregating in the region because you can sell to the military. And it continues like that. And then you have the establishment of the Menger Hotel, the Opera House, everything around us that continues to bring people in. And so we become the basic center of San Antonio because of the amount of people that are coming through.
There's a theater, there's a bank, there's restaurants.
There's everything. The other part of it is you also have Chili Queens, vendors that sold food in the plazas. They're here as well. And that's a really important part of San Antonio's life because the Chili Queen stands are the equalizers in society. Whether you are wealthy or not, you ate together. And so this plaza becomes very, very important. And it's a strategic thing because, one, you've got the iconic Alamo in the background. You've got an opera house across the street. You have a bank on the corner. You have the oldest hotel now, this side of Mississippi, operating. And so you have everything you need for a successful plaza and community.
It's just so interesting to consider if history had unfolded differently, what we know today as the South Side could have been downtown.
Yes, it could have. It could have been where we basically would congregate. But as luck would have it, the community that starts with a small mission and a town right in the horseshoe of what is San Antonio, the San Antonio River, will become the nexus for the seventh largest city in the United States.
This may be the easiest why the Alamo to answer. Why was it so important to save the Alamo Church in Lauenburg and not let them get lost to history? Because that came very close to happening.
Mm-hmm. It's very important because you must know where you've been to know where you're going. And you think about the church and the Long Barrack, right? The church is purchased by the state in 1883. And the Long Barrack is purchased by the Daughters Republic of Texas in 1905 and deeded over to the state. Those two structures are the building blocks for a Texan identity. And the thing most people don't realize is that identity begins with the mission in 1718. That little spark of what we are as Texans, always willing to help each other, always willing to go against whatever is wrong. That idea starts then. And when they build this little community, as the spark grows, it ignites into a bonfire in 1836. And our identity continues to grow with that battle, with the revolution, but it's mainly the sacrifice at the Alamo that prompts people to constantly remember the Alamo because they gave it all for what they believed in, freedom, independence. And it continues to grow. To this day, we continue to feed that bonfire as Texans. And it's always impressive to see when we travel the world, people will ask, where are you from? And the first thing a Texan says, Texas.
Why did pop culture grab onto the Alamo so hard in the 1950s and 60s with Fess Parker and John Wayne bringing this story to Hollywood?
But when you think about our story, ours is a very special story. And what makes it special in a way is the people that are here. You wouldn't have the story as it is today if it wasn't for these legendary people. And one of the most legendary is a man by the name of David Crockett. David Crockett was basically the self-made man. He came from almost nothing to become a politician, to become a congressman, to become an icon in his own time, to have books, plays written about him. The fact that he comes to the Alamo and dies here puts it on a different level. Then you've got a man named James Bowie, who's famous for the knife that has his name. So you've got two legends here. And then you have a young 26-year-old by the name of William Barrett Travis that writes one of the most incredible letters ever written by any Texan. And so you solidify our place because you have these three important figures that are larger than life. Now, look at Crockett. He is one of those people that everyone knew. He was the most famous American that was not the president. and he dies at the Alamo fighting for freedom. That sacrifice, among with the sacrifice from all the other known 189 men, shows how important the site is. They were doctors, lawyers, farmers, ranchers. They were from all over the world. There were people that were native born. One was born at the Alamo and died at the Alamo. This story is a people story that draws everyone to it, because no matter where you are in the world, everyone has a version of the Battle of the Alamo, where a small group of people fight against overwhelming odds, and it doesn't end well. But when you look at us being so lucky to live in a city that has an international event in it that takes place at a mission that became a fort that is named the Alamo, we are lucky enough to say the Alamo battle, and everyone else has to say our battle of such and such, but everyone knows the Alamo.
Well, John Wayne, at the end of the 1950s, when he's coming up with this movie, he could have showcased literally any battle. He could have done any movie plot. He was that big of a star. What was it at the end of the 1950s, the beginning of the 1960s, that made the country interested in the Alamo?
You have to think about what's happening on TV. There's a lot of Westerns that are popping up, right? And then you have Fess Parker coming out as Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. So there's this movement, but there's also something underlining it. There's a threat, and it's a threat for communism, basically, the Red Scare, as they would call it. And when you think about the Battle of the Alamo, it's the perfect stage to show people that you can stand and fight and be ready to stand and fight. You know, there's always a group of people that are willing to stay and fight till the end. And this fit perfectly into that era of our history.
Moving forward into the 1960s, why did Alamo Plaza become so central to the civil rights movement?
Because part of the entire movement, because if you think about it, you know, you have a battle in 1836 that's for freedom, but it's not freedom for everybody. And our story is one of those special stories because we get our story from people that did not have a voice, the voiceless at that time, women, children, and the enslaved. You fast forward to the 1960s, and you're in the middle of this movement with the civil rights in the East Coast. There's a movement in Texas that started in San Antonio in the 1920s with the Mexican-American civil rights movement, and it joins up with the African-American civil rights movement, so they actually band together, and they see what's happening on the East Coast. And you see these sit-ins, you see this violence break out as well. Now, you fast forward to San Antonio, and there's a college student that proposes we do something different. Now, we are Military City, USA, so we're already at a point where the military is integrated, so they make a choice. Do you want to have a sit-in, or do you want to desegregate your lunch counters? And San Antonio decides to desegregate quietly. And on March of 1960, we do so. What makes it really special is that we have a property on our complex, the Woolworth building. And the Woolworth was the site of many of these civil rights movements and the sit-ins. And our Woolworth is one that is among many in downtown that desegregates peacefully. So you think about it, something that started in 1836 came full circle, and in 1960, everyone had the right to do what everyone should be able to do, sit together and eat.
And as our listeners know, we are in the Future Visitor Center and Museum, scheduled to open in 2027, going to have a civil rights gallery. That lunch counter Ernesto's talking about, it's lost to time, but the outline remains on the floor. So we're going to use that space and talk about these issues. And it's really fascinating to think, Ernesto, 1960, the same year that lunch counter was desegregated. That's when John Wayne's movie came out.
Yes, it did. It premieres here in San Antonio as well. So it's one of those really interesting things. And what's special is that you think about it, this site matters. And whether you're looking at it through pop culture or through news reports, this place matters. And if you wanted to be able to make a point, you go to the place where one of the loudest points was made in 1836. We will stand till the end for what we believe in.
That gets into my final why the Alamo. Why is the Alamo so impactful with people from around the world? You know, we recently had on our social media a member profile of one of our Friends of the Alamo members. He came all the way here from Australia. He joined Friends of the Alamo having never been here. He was coming for a bucket list trip. And I asked him, why did you want to join a historic site that's so hard for you to get to from Australia? And he said, because it's given me so much. So what is it about the Alamo that has this hold on people that is so powerful?
A lot of things come from the Alamo, and one of them is it provides hope for people because even out of the ashes of defeat rose a republic. It makes you see that. It also is one of those stories that connects with everyone because, like I said before, we all have a similar battle in our own background, but we're lucky we have the Alamo. Now, the other thing is that we can associate with the people here. You know, when you think about David Crockett, that 1960 movie, you have John Wayne, this gigantic figure in Hollywood portraying that role. And when you think about it, in 1977, in August, the world lost an icon, and it was Elvis Presley. And the way the world reacted to that is the way the world reacted to the loss of Crockett. If you think about it, people saw him in places even though he had died here. So there's those human connections. When you can come to the Alamo and you can find something for everyone. If you're looking for Spanish history, it's here. If you're looking for Mexican history, it's here. If you're looking for American history, here. You're looking for world history. If you're looking for a story about the civil rights movement, it's here. If you're looking for a story about mercantilism, it's here. Everything is here in one small package that sits in downtown San Antonio. It's here. You want to see how a country was born? It's here.
So the overarching question, the title of this episode, why the Alamo? You're saying because it's all here.
Yep. This is a place that connects the world if you think about it. An international event happens here.
Ernesto Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've talked in this episode about so many things that may help you see the Alamo in a whole new way. With summer approaching, we hope you'll make time to come visit. So we've linked to everything you need to come see all this history in person. If visiting is just not in the cards right now, we've also linked to how you can join Friends of the Alamo, a true network of history enthusiasts from around the world. And your membership will go straight to ensuring that generations to come always remember the Alamo. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.